Hi, everyone, and welcome to Deep Geek Live. I am honoured to have with me as my special guest tonight someone who, when I went out to my patrons and asked them who would you most like me to be collaborating with on future live streams, came out top of the list. I am delighted to have as my special guest today Gemma from Secrets of the Citadel. Gemma, do you want to say hi to anyone who doesn't know who you are?
Yeah, I'd love to. Top of the list. That's pretty amazing. Yeah, I'm Gemma. I'm from Secrets of the Citadel. I'm echoing on Robert's stream. It's his audio, not mine. Okay. I'm seeing all the usual faces in the chat, but I am seeing some new ones who I assume are Robert's family, Game of Thrones family. So yeah, I'm just really happy to be here. I don't think I've actually been on your channel before, have I, Robert? You've been on mine, but I don't.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Yeah, and apologies, I'm not purple in real life. This is just people that know me on live streams. I've got the worst camera ever. I will invest in a new one, I promise. And then you'll see me in all my ginger glory one day.
Well, I have absolutely no evidence to prove whether or not Gemma is ginger or purple in real life. So one day I will be able to tell you. But yes, apologies if you are getting any reverb on the sound, guys. It is entirely my fault. Well, it's not my fault. It's Google's fault. But we'll keep going. So today we are going to talk about Rickon. Now, for me, Rickon is probably the most undervalued, under-discussed member of the Stark family. We're always talking about Sansa or Bran or Jon or whoever, Arya. We never talk about Rickon. And for me, I think the reason is that everybody, and I will probably include myself in this, has bought into this idea of Rickon being the shaggy dog story. Rickon is the story that actually it's quite long and interesting, but it doesn't mean anything. What I would like from this live stream is to just tease out the idea that there's something more to Rickon. He's not just this kind of dull add-on character. There's something else to him. And Gemma, perhaps you want to start off by just giving us some idea about why Rickon might be more than just this extra unknown Stark.
Yeah, like you said, the shaggy dog story element is why a lot of people see Rickon as a dead end, essentially. The dictionary definition of a shaggy dog story, and I've written it down. I've got some quotes prepared. It's a long, rambling story or joke, typically one that is amusing only because it's absurdly inconsequential or pointless. So a lot of people, and then obviously on the show he's dead. So he literally came back and had not a single line of dialogue. He was absurdly tall and grown up compared to the last time we saw him, and then he died, and now he's being buried in the crypts next to Ned. So that was a bit of a dead end. So yeah, a lot of people, I mean, we haven't seen Rickon, even in the books, have we, since A Clash of Kings? He's been mentioned a few times now, especially in Dance. But we literally have not even seen the youngest Stark since, yes, it is Spider-Woman, Lucifer means Lightbringer. Distraction. He's come in and he's distracted me already. What I would like to play with the idea of, and this is what you touched upon, Robert, is maybe George R. R. Martin, who, let's face it, is a monumental troll, wants to trick us into thinking that Rickon is not important by ironically calling his dire wolf Shaggy Dog. What do you think about that?
I like the idea, and he is indeed a massive troll. And hi, LML. Good to see you there in the chat, by the way. Yes, she is Spider-Woman today. She is purple Spider-Woman. So for me, I think, and we will get onto this, I think, in the second half of the discussion, Rickon is fundamentally going to end up a Shaggy Dog story, but that does not mean that he is not important. That does not mean that he hasn't got an important role to play, and that doesn't mean that he's not a powerful person. So for those who aren't aware of this whole idea of the wolves' names having an important role, if you look at all of the dire wolves that the Starks have, we get, for example, Ghost being Jon's direwolf, and Ghost, of course, is somebody who survives beyond death, and Jon, as we saw in the show, survives beyond death. And then we get Nymeria being Arya's direwolf, Nymeria being this great warrior woman, and Arya again being this great warrior woman. So the implication is that all of these direwolves tell the fates, their names tell the fates of their owners. And so that is where we get Shaggy Dog being this Shaggy Dog story. It means that Rickon is going to amount to nothing. Where I want to start with this is where we come to Rickon. And Rickon was very young at the very start of these books. He was very affected by what happened at the very beginning of the story, by the fact that, first of all, his father went away along with a huge amount of the people that he cared about, and then his mother went away along with Robb Stark, the big brother that he looked up to so much, and he was largely abandoned. Now, Gemma, what do you think the impact of those people abandoning him had on who he was and how he developed as a person?
I think it had a monumental effect on his development. He was like 3 years old when the War of the Five Kings really began kicking off, 3 or 4, around about that age. So very young, very impressionable. His mother obviously was initially consumed over Bran, and then she left, and then Robb left. But even during the time that Robb was there, he was busy being the Lord of Winterfell. He didn't have the time to look after Rickon or give him the attention that he needed. And I think Shaggy Dog, the direwolf, actually had a huge impact on Rickon's demeanor and upbringing and how he was raised, because all the other Starks, they were obviously older, so their direwolves were like their pets. But for Rickon, it was like they were cubs together, and they've grown together. So they're like this little mini, and you need 3 to be a pack, but they're kind of like a little pack within their own right. Rickon and Shaggy Dog. But yeah, so it was all he's raised by a wolf, almost literally, because that bond that Rickon has with Shaggy Dog is, and a lot of this, let's face it, is speculation, because we just know so little about Rickon. He had basically no effect on the story whatsoever up to this point. But this is what you were saying, Robert. It feels he is still around. He's being searched for, so he's like a Chekhov's gun right now, isn't he? Ready to go off. But yeah, again, he other than Robb, he's the only other Stark that we didn't have a POV chapters for. That probably wouldn't have been the most tantalizing chapters to read from the point of view of a 3-year-old child, but Ricky Dog, everyone's going to start using Ricky Dog in the chat now. But yeah, I mean, hugely traumatizing, and he's got this wild, savage, animalistic nature now, doesn't he? I mean, he's been sent to the perfect place, hasn't he?
He has, and I think for me, the word to sum him up is feral, which we'll come on to in a moment, because we had a couple of super chats. And guys, I should just say, as always, if there are super chats, we'll come to them straight away. Thank you so much for them. But please do just put your comments and thoughts and questions down there in the chat. We will try and incorporate them into what we're talking about as we go. We're going to talk largely the first half about Rickon on the show, the background, where he is, and then in the second half, some thoughts about where he might be going in the books. But a couple of super chats. First of all, Jen of House K, $9 99, thank you so much. That's really generous. I have to catch this later. I understand lots of people watch this later as well. That's fine. And just showing support for the lovely Lucifer. That's Lucifer means Lightbringer out there in the chat. The lovelier Gemma and the loveliest Robert. Thank you so much. That's very kind. And also we have B1 Merry Starry Sky, $9.99. Train is leaving the station, all aboard. Thank you. That's really kind. Talking about the early years, the really early years of Rickon, I would agree completely, Gemma. I think that Rickon as a character, he was so young. It was not that he was bringing up a direwolf. It was like they were growing up together. So it's like they became one, as it were. And when I say the word that I would associate with him is feral, what I mean is that when all the important people in his life went missing, first of all, he let his own appearance go because there was no parental figure going. His hair did start getting longer, so what we saw on the show was actually accurate to the books. His hair starting getting longer and shaggier. He was caring less about his appearance. And also, Shaggy Dog, as a wolf, seemed to go more as we would expect a direwolf to be, attacking people randomly, just being out of control, as it were. And this is where we get to with Rickon in the early years, is that he is a character who is so at one with the wolf that it's almost hard to distinguish between him and his character and that of Shaggy Dog, his direwolf. So Johnson Baptiste says, thank you so much, by the way, $10 super chat. That's lovely. Ricky Dog is coming down the track. Ricky Dog is what we're going to refer to Rickon from now on. Thank you, Gemma. That's great. What do you think? Any other thoughts about his early life? How those first, before Theon came back, those first few or couple of years or so, his formation, what do you make of it?
I do think, I mean, and this is book, because the show, well, they kind of had Summer kind of growled at Theon at one point, but there is a scene, you know, when Tyrion returns from the wall to Winterfell and he brings the plans to Bran for the saddle. In the books, the direwolves, Rickon comes into the Great Hall where Rob's not greeting Tyrion, with the direwolves, and they essentially attack Tyrion and have to be called off. And I think that this is, again, and this falls into this bond that Rickon has made with the direwolves. I think all of the other Starks have their own agendas and they have other things on their mind, you know, things that they're concerned about, that they're worried about. Bran has got this whole three-eyed raven thing going on, and his third eye is opening. But he's older, so on a spiritual level, that's maybe harder for him to accept what he is. Obviously, Sansa and Arya and Jon are all far removed, and is Rob. But I think there's evidence to suggest that it was Rickon that was somehow feeding his feelings into the direwolves at that moment. And I think that suggests that then that's why they attack Tyrion. And I think that suggests that Rickon is potentially an extremely, if not the most powerful warg of all of the Stark children. He's just been ignored, you know, not just by the other Starks, but by us as well as readers. He's flown under that radar.
Yeah, I agree completely, and I want to get onto this because I think this is a really important point about Rickon, is that we kind of treat him just as this child who's a hanger-on, who just gets sort of brought up within the Great Escape for Bran to bring him north of the Wall, and then when it seems a little bit silly to take him north of the Wall, they send him off somewhere else. But actually, there is a lot of evidence to suggest that he might be a powerful green seer, and perhaps we'll come on in a moment to quite how powerful he might be. But Gemma, perhaps you could, I will throw one at you first, but perhaps you could come up with a few examples of why we might think he is powerful. And I think one of them, the thing that I would say first is that when Ned died, and we saw the scene where Bran had the dreams that Ned, his father, was down in the Winterfell crypts, and he went down there, and the person who was there already was Rickon, who'd had very similar dreams. And so this implies that he also knew, and perhaps knew even before Bran knew, that his father was dead. And this was before the Raven had arrived. So that's one hint that perhaps he's already quite powerful. What other hints are there, Gemma, that he might be a powerful green seer in some way?
There's many hints that he's a powerful warg, but as far as green seeing goes, I have to agree with your example there. And we focus so much, don't we, on Bran. He saw Ned's death in a vision. He saw it in a dream, and wow, Bran's so powerful. And we forget that Rickon was there before Bran. Rickon was already in the crypts. He was already down there with Shaggy Dog. He'd seen it, and in fact, he seemed to be more resigned than Bran was in denial at that point. It wasn't until afterwards that Lewin gave him the information that it was true. Ned really was dead because the Raven had come. But it felt that Rickon had already made peace with this news, this knowledge. So it was like Rickon believed the dream more than Bran did, if that makes sense. Bran was certainly in denial, but Rickon, he just says leave him alone. He's like he's already accepted it. So it feels that if this green seeing is definitely a thing for Rickon, which I believe it is, that he's certainly embraced it faster and harder than even Bran did. And again, we just focus on Bran. He's so powerful, but poor Rickon, we do forget him. Somebody said we're getting Rickon rolled in the chat, which I thought was hilarious.
Yes, I would agree with you. I think one other thing that I would say, which is really interesting about Rickon, and again, this is a hint. This isn't something that George R.R. Martin has come out and written. Rickon was a powerful green seer / powerful warg, whatever. These are hints because he was so young. He didn't have a chance really to develop his skills. And when we talk about green seers, one of the things that we learn is that historically they have tended to have green eyes. Now, it's noticeable that none of the Starks have green eyes. We wouldn't expect them to have green eyes. And none of the direwolves have green eyes except for Shaggy Dog, who it is said has got very green eyes. Now, again, it's a hint, but it's suggestive that perhaps the more powerful or the more natural green seer is Rickon rather than Bran. Now, in a moment, I'd like to get onto this whole thought of is actually the person that the Bloodraven was looking for and that Jojen was hunting for, was it actually possibly Jojen? So was it possibly Rickon, not Bran? We did just have I just want to quickly pick up on a super chat from Cherie McLean, who says someone should have taught him to zigzag while running. And yes, absolutely. That was for me. It was great TV, and it was one of my favorite episodes of the entire show. But someone should have told him to zigzag. Gemma, feel free to either pick up on the zigzagging or that thought about whether or not this was who Jojen really was looking for.
Well, it's like Rickon never watched Apocalypto, I mean, come on, everybody knows you zigzag. But the amount of memes that came out of that, I just thought it was just such an ignominious end, because he literally vanished for seasons and then came back about 7 foot tall, had no dialogue, and then died. And I just thought that was awful. But I suppose that was the Shaggy Dog story arc that maybe we're going to see in the books as well. Yeah, I think there's a very good chance that Bloodraven / Jojen, they were looking for a Stark. If Bran hadn't had his accident with Jaime Lannister, there is a very good chance that Bran would have never had cause or reason to embrace what he really was, and in which instance, you have a backup plan in the form of Rickon, or maybe Bran was the backup plan, like an unexpected circumstance that occurred with Jaime pushing him that then pushed Bran into becoming something more powerful and turned Bloodraven's one of his eyes, and thought, hang on, this guy, this one's older, he's probably more malleable for one reason or another, I'll go with him. But yeah, I mean, Bloodraven clearly has a plan, so it would make sense that he had a plan A and a plan B. So maybe that's where Rickon comes in.
So my theory here, and Jammer, please shoot this down in flames in just a moment. My theory is that Bloodraven did not know who he was dealing with, because when we see all these green dreams, they're very symbolic. They're not actually seeing who the person is that you're dealing with. And when Bran goes and talks to Bloodraven, he says, "Are you the three-eyed crow, the three-eyed raven?" And Bloodraven doesn't seem to know who he is. He doesn't seem to recognize himself as that image. And similarly, when we see Bran, as Jojen describes him, it's a wolf with wings tied down by chains. And I have a feeling that if you were to say to Bran, are you the wolf with wings tied down by chains? He would go, what? So I think that this is the world that they're living in is not I am picking Bran, I am picking Rickon. The world that Bloodraven was working in was, there is over there in Winterfell a Stark who is gifted. He is gifted as a green seer. He is a wolf. He has wings, which was made to fly, and he is being changed down. Now, my theory is that Bloodraven was casting about all over the place. He wasn't specifically looking for Bran. He was looking for someone, anyone. This is why when we have the vision of Bran falling to the ground before he learned to fly, before he learned to unleash his magic, he could see that there were skeletons cast all over the floor. And these, I think, were the people who could not learn to fly, could not learn to unleash their magic. And so I think that Bloodraven was just casting about all over the place, including to, for example, Euron. That's an entire tangent that perhaps we shouldn't go down, but I think that is one of the people that he got in contact with. And I think that when Jojen came up looking for a Stark, he was not looking for Bran Stark. He was looking for a wolf with wings tied down by chains, symbolic of somebody, and he decided that it was Bran rather than Rickon, because Bran was slightly older and had some hints already of his powers that Rickon, being reclusive as he was, wasn't showing. So Gemma, what do you make of that idea that it was almost random that it was Bran, not Rickon, that was chosen?
I absolutely love that. I love that so much. And speaking of chains, how many times do the adults in Winterfell tell Rickon that dog needs to be chained up, that wolf should be chained? And Rickon even says in the crypts he doesn't like chains, which a lot of people flagged up as foreshadowing with House Umber, with the sigil of House Umber. But yeah, chains come up a lot in connection to Shaggy Dog, not Ricky Dog. Everybody's using Ricky Dog this is canon in my head now, Ricky Dog. But yeah, so it's like Bloodraven kind of he picked up a signal, and he just cast this wide net and reeled it in and waited to see what would turn up on his doorstep, and it happened to be Bran, because of course they sent Rickon away. We don't know if anything was calling to Rickon. We don't know what his dreams were. We don't know if he had visions or what he saw. We know nothing because there was no POV chapter and everybody ignored him all the time. I love it.
Great. I'm feeling very pleased now that I've got the Gemma seal of approval on that one. So yeah, I think this is the chains for me is another clue. I think that Shaggy Dog was at one point chained down, and that was at about the same time that Jojen's coming there saying, "I'm looking for a chained wolf with wings." And so if you've got a green-eyed direwolf chained down with a connected Stark who clearly has got at least very strong warging abilities, then for me the implication is that he should have been looking for Rickon, but he got Bran instead. Now that doesn't mean Bran's not gifted, it doesn't mean Bran's not talented, it doesn't mean that Bran is not a green seer, but it just means that there might have been a bit of a case of mistaken identity that's just left there as a hint in the books for us to sort of follow up on. So that's the starting point we got for Bran, is that I personally feel that this idea that Bran is that Rickon is just this hanger-on, that Ricky Dog is this hanger-on that that we should just sort of ignore because he's not important to the story. I think he's actually a bit like in Harry Potter, when you have what's his name, the other guy who potentially could have had all of the prophecies about him, but actually they would turned out to be about Harry. So it was that this is the kind of idea that I've got in my mind, that this could have been a story about Rickon, but it was actually a story about Bran. So Gemma, let's move on a little bit. Let's move on to the fact that they then head on up to having escaped. So Theon took over Winterfell. They hid down in the crypts. Then they all escaped as this gang, and they headed north. And then Rickon got sent off with Osha in the books to somewhere else. We at the end we think it's Skalgos. Why do you think that happened? Yes, we know the sort of the general idea, but why is that important that the two of them got separated?
Oh, that's two separate questions, isn't it? I think Bran genuinely wanted to protect Rickon, but I also think, as far as, and I'm going to get into this a little bit later. I'm not sure about you, Robert, but the Grand Northern Conspiracy, as far as that's concerned, plot-wise, it was very helpful that Bran and Rickon were separated at that point. Obviously, the characters don't care about the plot, but why Skargos? I mean, there is a school of thought that don't even believe he's in Skargos right now. Well, again, we'll get into that in a little while when we start waxing lyrical. But why Skargos is a huge question. I mean, we don't know, it's speculation, but we have a lot of theories. I mean, Osha seems to be the one that's taken that upon herself. When she asks Lewin where, he suggests many places, not one of them being Skargos. So yeah, I think that was something that, maybe Osha has family there. I mean, part of Skargos is, if anyone's not familiar, Skargos is like a large island. It's in the mouth of the Bay of Seals. It's north of Winterfell, and in fact, the top half of Skargos is actually beyond the wall. So, and wildlings have boats, so there's possibly a connection. Osha either has family or friends, or she just knows something about Skargos. I mean, there's a lot of rumors about Skargos. Davos is utterly petrified of the concept of Skagos. But again, we're going to get into that a lot more, aren't we? But yeah, I think it was OSHA's decision, although exactly what that was based on, what information she has that we're not aware of, not 100%. What do you think?
Yeah, I think that the reason why they went to Skagos, if they did go to Skagos, and I think they probably did, was because that is a long way away, and the whole idea is to try and get as far away as possible from what is going on. Now, I just want to quickly dip into the chat for a moment, because a couple of people are just telling me Neville Longbottom. That was the person whose name I was completely forgetting in Harry Potter. Yeah, so the point there was that Neville Longbottom, for those who are Potterheads will be aware, the prophecies about Harry Potter could have been about Neville Longbottom, but they weren't. They were about Harry. And as LML said, the not chosen one. That was very much the way that I view Rickon's role here, was that he could have been as important as Bran is, but just through a twist of fate, he didn't end up there. Let's just take a moment to think about Rickon's fate, and we'll talk, I think, about Skagos in the second half of this in just a moment. Let's think about Rickon's fate on the show. Now, I had one of my patrons, Cornelia, said, it seems to me Sansa didn't care at all for Rickon's life at the Battle of the Bastards. Did she just want Ned's male heir out of the way so that she could become Lady of Winterfell, or was there really no chance to save Rickon from Ramsay? So, Gemma, what do you think on that one? If we're just thinking about the show now, at the Battle of the Bastards, then he was released by Ramsay Bolton, and Sansa said he's dead already. Was that right, or was that Sansa being politically calculating?
Okay, well, this was actually a bit of a point of contention in season 6, because when they originally got the show's version of the pink letter, from Ramsay, which was not the pink letter, but it's kind of a nod to the pink letter, and obviously Jon refuses to read out a lot of it to Sansa because of the inappropriate content. At that point, Sansa is the one pushing to retake Winterfell, and she uses Rickon. They have our brother, and then skip a couple of episodes later, and she's like, meh, he's a write-off, he's dead. And a lot of people were like, wow, a couple of episodes ago, this was the reason why we were doing this, and now you're saying he's a lost cause. I do wonder about Sansa's motivations in the show, not specifically because I have an issue with Sansa as a character, but maybe the writing. You know how I feel about some of the writing in the later episodes and the later seasons, especially. It seems to have been geared just to fit in with plot points. But as Christopher in the chat has literally just this minute said, Sansa was proven right. I mean, she did know Ramsay Bolton, perhaps initially, and I'm just trying to figure out why it was written this way. Perhaps initially she was just using Rickon to convince Jon, because she knows that he would go for that, plucking at his heartstrings. But ultimately, I think she must have always known that Rickon, obviously, because they think Bran's dead at this point, Rickon is far more, and she says it, doesn't she? She says Rickon's more important than Jon, a bastard, or me, a girl. Rickon is Ned Stark's true-born son, and this is just far too much of a threat for Ramsay to keep him alive. And we all knew he was toying with Rickon with those arrows. We've seen what Ramsay can do with arrows. I mean, I've seen some insane nitpicking about somebody actually worked out how long Rickon was running for, and then worked out, like, on a basis of an average of distance, how far he would have traveled during that time and how far the arrow therefore would have traveled, and basically concluded that it would have been impossible to shoot Rickon. I'm like, wow. And I thought I was nitpicky, but yeah, it was a butt clencher, wasn't it, that scene?
It was, and I think if it had been Gendry, then Gendry clearly would have run a lot faster and for a lot longer, because Gendry's just like Superman. I think for me, I would agree. When she was first talking about Rickon, let's save our brother, that was her trying to convince Jon to get Winterfell back, because that was what she wanted, and she was playing with Jon to try and get him back online, because Jon at the time, if you remember, he'd just been resurrected. He was a little bit emo, a little bit mopey, a little bit, no, I'm not really sure if I want to do all of this. And she was just trying to G him up and like say, you know what, this is your little brother that you grew up with. We've got to go save him. So I think that was what was going on to start with. Then later on, yes, Sansa was playing this stupid game by not telling them about the fact, hey, we've got this massive army who's just about to come and join us. That might help us with our tactics and strategy. So, but I think she was absolutely right that the only reason why Rickon was released by Ramsay was because Ramsay wanted to tempt and taunt Jon into doing something stupid, and Ramsay just got Jon right. He knew that he would, and that was a stupid thing that Jon did, running out there, leaving his army behind him to go and try and save Rickon. And that was the reason why Ramsay did it. And I think it wasn't. And when Sansa was saying, no, he's dead, that was her understanding what Ramsay was like, and trying to make sure that Jon didn't do something stupid, which he obviously then went and did. So I think that was what that whole thing was about. It wasn't Sansa trying to play Jon in any particular way. She was trying to, first of all, G him up to get him on side, and then secondly, just being realistic. The only reason why Rickon was being set free was because Ramsay was going to kill him in a bit, because she knew and understood him. Let's take a quick moment. Just I wanted to say a couple of things just to my subscribers and my patrons. First of all, to my patrons, I just want to say thank you, as I always do. I honestly could not do this without you. If you are not a patron, but you're a subscriber, you're a regular viewer, please do consider looking at my Patreon page. What my Patreon community is about is just having a chance to, first of all, support the channel, but also I want to provide additional content for you. I do every month I do a reading just for my patrons from the pre-release chapters of the Winds of Winter. We've got one more to go, which is the second Arianne chapter, which is a really good chapter. I'm really looking forward to it. So that will be coming out probably in a couple of weeks' time. So that's the first thing. The second thing I want to say is, if you haven't caught what I said in the last couple of live streams, I will be launching a new channel at some point soon, before the end of this month. And the new channel is called The Well Told Tale. And there's a link down in the description if you want to go check it out. If you want to subscribe already, that would be fantastic. This is going to be me narrating the best science fiction, fantasy, speculative fiction stories ever written. It's just going to be audio narration. It's just going to be me reading books. There's going to be no annoying adverts in the middle. It's going to be long form, 45 minutes, maybe an hour per episode, one per week, and I am really excited about it. If you want to hear the best science fiction and fantasy stories read as audiobooks, then please do check out the link below. And if you are a patron of mine or someone who wants to support the channel, there's also a link to my GoFundMe page for that as well, which will allow me to set this up to the best audio content, the quality that I possibly can, right from the beginning. So please do check that out as well. But Gemma, what have you got going on that you would like just to flag up for people?
Most people in the chat, I recognize the names and the avatars, so you know me. I'm doing my unraveling the text at the moment, which I'm really enjoying. Every time I do a video that's not unraveling the text, I feel a little bit like George R.R. Martin now, just a tiny bit. You know, whenever he goes on Twitter and posts a picture of his pet turtle, everybody's freaking out because he hasn't written The Winds of Winter. Every time I post a video that's not unraveling the text, I just get a flurry of comments. When are you going to do unraveling the text again? We need unraveling the text again. I'm like, okay, I'm on it. I have to do other things too, because I would go stir crazy. I'm also doing like an Easter egg hunt through the series. But yeah, unraveling the text is my favorite because I get to curl up and I get to pick up my book again and I get to just go through it fine tooth comb, and I love doing that. They're like 10-minute long ish videos, one per chapter. I'm now on brand 4, which will I think I've already released it actually. I can't remember. Of A Clash of Kings. So yes, Herb, I am still doing theory videos, but they are becoming, I'm gonna be honest, they're becoming few and far between, because I feel that we're reaching a point now where many of these theories are grasping at straws, let's say. Unless something comes up that I feel is really worthy of merit, I'm not going to touch it just for the sake of it, or just for the clicks or the sensation of the theory. And it needs to be super solid. We're going to be talking a little bit about the Grand Northern Conspiracy in a little while. Well, like I said earlier, I am, and I've wanted to do a video about that for a long time, and I just haven't got round to it. So that, keep your eye out for that one. That will be coming up soon. I'm shutting up now.
Those are all excellent things, and just out of all of that, one thing I would highly recommend is checking out on Secrets of the Citadel, Unraveling the Text. This is, for those who don't know it, this is Gemma going through literally chapter by chapter A Song of Ice and Fire, digging out all of the things that we might have missed when we were reading it the first time, the second time, the third time even. It's a fantastic series she's got going on there, and I would highly recommend that you go and check that one out. I'm glad that you enjoy doing it, Gemma, because I know I enjoy watching the videos, and I know lots of other people also enjoy watching them. But my eye was drawn to a really important question in the chat from our very good friend Lucifer Means Lightbringer, who will be on with you, Gemma, at some point very soon. In fact, tomorrow, because I'm also going to be on your channel tomorrow. We're going to be doing a live stream, and is also going to be coming back on here at some point, probably in 2 or 3 weeks' time, to talk about Bran. This was something that when LML was on my channel for one of these live streams, and I should probably say that when LML came on here before, his was the most liked live stream I've ever had. So if you want to see a reprise of that, then check it out in 2 or 3 weeks' time when he's coming on, and we're going to talk about Bran. But the question he asked for this time, which, as I said, I think is a very important question that we do need to address now. And Gemma, if you could answer this one directly, please. When are we going to talk about unicorn goats? Go.
I am so shocked that we have not had more unicorns and goats emojis in the chat. I mean, where were you guys? Come on, we need unicorns and goats. Yeah, I kind of laid something on you a couple of minutes before we actually went on this live stream, and you were sold like that, weren't you? I actually believe we've seen one of these. Okay, before I get into that, I just need to explain unicorn ghosts. Now, according to legend, the Scargosi, or the Skags, as they are very rudely referred to by people in Westeros, apparently ride unicorns. But we're not talking, look at all the unicorns in the chat. But we're not talking about romping around on rainbows and farting glitter unicorns. It's not that kind of unicorn at all. I mean, the theory goes is that they are like mountain goats with a long horn. I have heard a theory that there are no unicorns on Skargos at all, that it's like a myth or like a legend that they've developed, and actually they are harvesting the horns from narwhals, like dolphin whale type creatures that swim around, and then presenting them as the horns of these unicorns and then selling them as these magical, wonderful things. But essentially, it's like a large goat-like animal, very, very hairy, very smelly. It's not a pretty looking unicorn. But I actually think that we've been to Skargos in the text, and I think we've seen one of these unicorn goats. And I did mention this to you very briefly, didn't I, Robert? And did I sell it to you?
You did sell it to me. So I'm going to give a little intro to this, which is for those who missed the first half of this live stream, the reason why we're talking about unicorn goats and the reason why we're talking about Skagos is that in the books, Rickon isn't dead yet. Let's put it that way. And we'll come on in a moment to whether we think that his fate is going to be roughly the same in the books as it was on the show. But in the books, the hint is that he has gone to Skagos. So Osha has taken him somewhere else. And we get these stories from a character called Wex that perhaps you could talk about as well, Gemma, that he is currently hiding out on the island of Skagos, where there are these unicorn goats. So you queried whether you'd sold me on the idea that we have already seen Skagos. This was one of these dreams that all of the most of the Starks at least have about their direwolves, where they seem to be able to not just see what their own direwolf is doing, but what's going on with the rest of the pack. And in one of these, John seems to be aware about what's going on with shaggydog. So yes, I think you've sold me on that one, but do you want to just explain what that dream was?
I think it would be better to not explain it in my words, but to read the quote. This is from A Dance of Dragons. This is one of John's warging wolf dreams. Far off, he could hear his packmates calling to him like to like. They were hunting too. A wild rain lashed down upon his black brother as he tore at the flesh of an enormous goat, washing the blood from his side where the goat's long horn had raked him. In another place, his little sister lifted her head to sing to the moon, and 100 small grey cousins broke off their hunt to sing with her. The hills were warmer where they were, and full of food. Many a night his sister's pack gorged on the flesh of sheep and cows and horses, the prey of men, and sometimes even the flesh of man himself. So there we have it. Black brother. That's not talking about a brother of the Night's Watch. That's talking about there's only one black direwolf, and that's Shaggydog. And enormous goat. I mean, we're not talking about a normal goat. We're talking about an enormous goat. That is quite specific. An enormous goat with a long horn. So I think John has directly seen Rickon and Shaggydog in Skargos in that warging vision dream thing.
With a horny goat.
With a horny goat.
Excellent. So I think we are largely agreed that Rickon in the books, which is about a season or two back, depending on which timeline you're talking about, is hiding away on Skagos. Now we also get this character called Wex, who is the person who knows where he went, apparently, and he is towards the end of where the books have got up to. He is with the Mandaleys and Robert Glover, and he he's a mute, but he writes and he sort of explains things by drawing stuff, saying that this is where Rickon is. And the reason why this is important is because there is this big hint, and in a moment, Gemma, just to warn you, I'm going to say Grand Northern Conspiracy, go. But the reason why this is important is because the Manderleys seem to be in charge of or coordinating in some way the resistance to the Boltons. This idea that they are still loyal to the Starks, and the only thing that they need really in order to put up a real resistance is an actual Stark. So Gemma, that's my top level explanation of the Great Northern Conspiracy. Do you want to give us a little bit more of a detail about what that is and why this makes Rickon very important in the books?
Okay, the Grand Northern Conspiracy is it's a massively complex political situation in the North that's been sparked from the Red Wedding. I mean, and when I say massively complex, it seems to be kind of threefold, but one of the folds involves Wyman, Manderley, and Rickon. Now, basically, Wyman Manderley, and I've got another quote here because this backs up the fact that Wyman Manderley is in on this. He's one of the snowmen, isn't he? I'm going into this with a lot of assumptions that people already understand what the Grand Northern Conspiracy is. I literally don't have the time to explain all of this right now. But basically, Wyman Manderley, the North remembers, his son Wendell was killed during the Red Wedding. And most of the Northern, I think every single Northern house suffered at least one loss during the Red Wedding. The North remembers, and although they are pretending to support the Boltons and the Freys, they're not. And yes, the people in the chat are talking about fake Arya, Jane Paul. This is another branch of this. It feels like there's at least three that I can think of, kind of separate conspiracies all going on with essentially the same goal, but they're just not communicating very well with each other at this point. If they all got their heads together, but of course, Raven communication isn't necessarily the most private, so that's an interesting concept, that you've got these separate conspiracies that they all essentially have the same agenda, and that's to put a Stark back in Winterfell. And Wyman Manderley says, "My son Wendell came to the twins as a guest. He ate Lord Walder's bread and salt and hung his sword upon the wall to feast with friends, and they murdered him. Murdered, I say, and may the phrase choke upon their fables. I drink with Jared, jape with Simon, promise Rhaegar the hand of my own beloved granddaughter, but never think that means I have forgotten. The North remembers, Lord Davos. The North remembers, and the mummer's farce is almost done. My son is home." Well, Wyman Manderley has basically tasked Davos with going to find, much to Davos's abject horror, to go and get Rickon from Skargos. And they have good reason to believe that Rickon is there through, like you said, Wex. I think this is why Lady Barbary Dustin went down to the crypts, because I think she wanted to confirm Wex's story that the three swords were removed from the crypts by Bran, Osha, and Hodor. And I think that's why she went down. I think she needed, because she's very much part of this particular branch of the conspiracy. So yeah, that's kind of where we're left with. There is a theory, there is argument that Wex is either lying or mistaken identity, but I'm on board with this. I think Rickon is in Skargos. I think Wex was telling the truth. Do you think Wex was telling the truth?
I do. I think so. For those who are confused by what Davos is doing in this and who Wex might be, Wex is a character. He's not on the show, but Wex is somebody who witnessed what was going on in a number of different. He was there as as Theon's squire, I think it was his actual technical role, and he saw a huge amount of what was going on, and he knew where, or we think he knew where Rickon went, and I do believe him. I do believe that when he thought they were going to Skagos, then that was right, and I think that the reason I believe is because of that dream that we were talking about a moment ago with LML. Let's get back to the horny goats with the horny goat. So that is why I think Rickon is on Skagos. Just talking briefly about Davos. Davos has a slightly different storyline in the books than he had on the show, and he has ended up being locked up in White Harbor at the mercy of the Manderleys, but Wyman Manderley appears to have faked Davos's death, and Davos is out there trying to rally support for Stannis as king, and he's faked Davos's death and said, okay, if you go get Rickon for us, then we will accept Stannis as the king. So that's the kind of the deal which is put in front of Davos. And that is why we haven't actually seen him head off yet, but this is why he's probably now going to head up to Skagos to try and find Rickon. The question I think I now have is, if that's where we're at in the books, is Rickon's end going to be roughly the same as it was on the show? Is he just going to die in some kind of meaningless way, living up to the Shaggy Dog story? Or in the books, is there some twist that we don't know about? Is he actually going to survive to the final book, to the end game? Has he got some secret role? Gemma, tell us, give us the answer to this. Is Rickon just a Shaggy Dog story, or is there something more to him?
Well, I have another quote, but this is from Lucifer Means Lightbringer. And I'm paraphrasing here because I can't remember exactly what he said, but he has this vision of Rickon riding Shaggy Dog with an army of skags on their horny goats, riding into Winterfell to retake it. I mean, as much as we would love to see that, George R. R. Martin doesn't make a habit of giving us what we want, does he? Let's face it. But yeah, Lucifer Means Lightbringer did make me promise that I would just paint that image for you. And he's very happy in the chat now. I must say, this chat is hilarious. You guys are so funny. Where were we? Yeah, I think Davos is absolutely, like I said earlier, utterly horrified at the concept. He wants to go back into jail, basically. That Skagos is not a friendly place. George R. R. Martin likes to play with the concept of rumors, doesn't he? So if we've never seen a place or met a person, we have a lot of introduction to this scene or this character before we actually meet them. And this was the same with Mance Rayder and the Wildlings. Before we actually went beyond the wall with Jon, we thought we knew so much about these people. Everybody was talking about Mance Rayder and what he was like. Everybody was all these stories and tales of what the Wildlings were like. And then when we actually met them, yeah, there was some kernels of truth within these rumors, but they had been completely blown out of proportion. And I suspect that something similar is going on with Skagos. But Davos, he's been about a bit. And Skagos, they do trade their unicorn, narwhal, horn things. So maybe he does have first-hand experience. We don't know. But I can't see Davos just prancing over to Skagos, picking up Rickon, everything's wonderful, bringing him back on a boat, and then planting Rickon, who would be about 6 or 7. So that's another question, political player or political pawn. I just can't see it panning out the way that everybody assumes it will. And Lucifer means Lightbringer is correct. Skargosi means stoneborn, which is an interesting contrast to the Ironborn, isn't it?
It is, and I think I would agree on the fundamental point that everything is not going to go according to plan. So the Grand Northern Conspiracy, as you say, the reason why it's quite complicated, and RJ, I saw you just said in the chat a while ago, Alt Shift X does do an excellent video on this. If you want to know what the Grand Northern Conspiracy is, then please do go check out that video. It's quite a complicated plot,
Yeah.
and it doesn't appear that everybody's talking to everybody else. It just seems to be a lot of loyalists trying to do their thing and coming up with their own little plans, which may or may not join up with one another. But I think that it's reasonably likely that this idea that Davos is going to go collect Rickon, come back, and then he is going to go leading this great northern alliance of all the loyal houses. That's not going to happen in my view. So I'm sorry for people who are imagining him leading this pack of horny goats, horny unicorn goats, whatever we're calling them, and just big respect for the people in the chat with some wonderfully inventive emojis I saw for trying to come up with what a horny unicorn goat would look like. I think at least some people have gone with rhinoceros, which seems quite close to me. But I think the point for me here was, and I'm going to pick up actually John St. Baptiste. I saw you there in the chat. Hi, good to see you. One of my patrons said, if Rickon is not a shaggy dog, will he be too feral to even remotely adapt when he returns? And I think this is a really important point, because the story arc we've got for Rickon, such as it is that he starts off as a Stark, but then he is devastated by the loss of all of the parental figures that he ever had. And he starts to become feral, for want of a better word. He becomes very close to his direwolf, and it's very hard to tell the difference between their two temperaments. He becomes angry, he lets his hair grow, and then where on earth do you put this child who has no real idea about how to live in civilized society, because he's rejecting everything? You go off and put him over there with all the cannibals and the horny goats. So when he emerges, I do not think we're going to have this clean-cut hero who's the Stark Lord in waiting. I think, John St. Baptiste, I think you're entirely right. When we see him next in the books, and I think we will see him, then I do not think we're going to see this wonderful Stark Lord in waiting. We are going to see quite a character who's been hiding out and becoming more and more wolf-like. What do you think of that idea, Gemma? Is that how you imagine him when you next see him?
Absolutely. If you wanted to civilize and tame Rickon Stark, taking him to Skaggos was probably like literally the worst idea ever. A lot of people have questioned, why would they take him somewhere so dangerous, so frightening? I mean, the people that live there, the Skags, they're said to have Ibonese blood. They're hairy, they're smelly, descended from giants. They live in caves or mountain fasts. I mean, they do have lords. They have House Magna, so that would suggest some kind of social structure. But I mean, they're cannibals, according, if you're going to believe the rumors. I don't think it's as simple as that. But yeah, they've taken the wild feral Rickon to a wild feral land, which is only going to serve to further make him wild and feral. So and a lot of people, like I said, have questioned why they would take him somewhere so dangerous. But actually, if anybody is going to fit right in, it would be Rickon, and I think there's a very good chance that the people there, especially if he's able to demonstrate, as we were talking about when we first started this chat, the green seeing and the warging. I mean, there's another theory that Skargos is an island full of very powerful wargs. You know, he could be embraced, and actually maybe he won't want to go with Davos. He won't want to go back to Winterfell, and you know, maybe he's found his place, or maybe they've just eaten him. Who knows?
Yeah, I think I agree with that completely. I think that there's a very good chance that he will not. And Davos is already quite skeptical about this mission, and the idea that he would pick up Rickon and Rickon would go, "Hey, yeah, great, let's go and do this." I think that is quite a tenuous link to make. So I think there's a long shot as to whether or not Rickon will want to come back, and if Davos goes up there and tries, this is slight tangent onto Davos's storyline. What does Davos do then if he can't get Rickon back? My guess is that he just accepts that and ends up back at the wall as he was on the show. So I think perhaps that might be a way around this whole Davos going off around the world kind of storyline we've got on the books, and he ends up back where he was in the show. And while we're talking about the show, I do wonder, at the risk of giving some potential credit to the showrunners, because I know it's very de rigueur to say how terrible they've been, but I do wonder whether the fact that Rickon didn't say anything might, when he came back, might be reflective of where he's been, of who he has become while he's been away. He has been with Osha, who was not the most talkative of people, and then he has been probably more than anything else in with shaggydog, and then he's gone to a place where he's probably been hiding in a cave. The fact that when he returns back, he's got this long mane of hair, he's 18 foot high or whatever it was you said, Gemma, he's not talking to people, that actually to me feels quite right for how he would be when he got brought back. So that I think actually adds up a little bit. We've had another super chat, Kathy Stark. Thank you so much. That's very generous. Is there a blood connection between the Starks and the Skagosi? And Gemma is nodding furiously, so I shall hand this straight over to you, Gemma. Is there a blood connection?
Yes, I believe there is. We don't know for 100%, but there is really, really strong textual evidence that would suggest. I think this is a question that will be answered in the Tales of Dunk and Egg, if they ever, if we ever get more of those released, which fingers crossed we will, because they are wonderful. I think it was about 100 years ago. Because Skargos is their liege, is the Lord of Winterfell, the Starks, or it was the Starks, before Bolton and Frey did their thing. But about 100 years ago, there was like a rebellion that was basically crushed, and we don't really fully understand how that rebellion came to an end. And if you look at not wars, but like rebellions and things that have gone down in the past, quite often the resolution of these differences of opinions was a marriage pact. I think it's very, very possible that, and Lucifer means Lightbringer said Bath Blacksword. I think that's ringing a bell. Lucifer means Lightbringer's got insane knowledge, and this is coming back to what, and I think it's Ned's mother's line, because Ned's mother and father are cousins, and then there's a flint goes up there somewhere, and I think it's through that line somewhere. It was about 100 years ago that this occurred, which is what lends itself to the theory that everybody on Skargos is these super crazy powerful wargs and greenseers, that it's not actually the Stark blood, or even the Blackwood blood, that gives the Starks their abilities. It's actually blood that's come from Skargos. This is just a theory that I've seen it's not my theory, but I do like the theory very much. I think George R. R. Martin has actually said that the warging doesn't come from Stark blood. So who knows?
No, I think the warging is a northern thing. I think it's a blood of the first men thing, and I think that ultimately it probably comes from the children of the forest and the old religion. That's my personal view. I think that's where it came from originally. In terms of the link, LML, I'm not with you. You talked about Barthagon Stark. I wasn't sure that he was a specific blood relation across to Skagos, but the relation between House Stark and Skagos is quite an odd one, because although technically Skagos as an island is part of the North and has accepted Stark rule, the Starks have largely ignored it. They've largely said, okay, you can get on with what you do. And so whereas they have tried with the other families on the mainland to sort of marry off people to them to make sure that they're part of that they've got the blood ties there, with the Skagosi, and I don't know whether that's the correct way to refer to them, but it sounds good to me, then there hasn't, I don't think that there is a definitive record of there being a blood match, of being intermarriage, which doesn't mean, and I'm very happy to be contradicted here, by the way, in the chat if you know of one, but that doesn't mean that there is not a link across there. There is, as Gemma said, there a lot of trading that happens across the piece. They do trade into to Eastwatch, and then all the way down to White Harbor as well. So there is, it's not like they're hidden away on an island and there's no connection. There is connection across to the mainland. It's just it's not a huge direct link of a connection. Iconic Thought has asked this a couple of times. Given this is a Rickon live stream, who will be the Lord of Winterfell? I think the answer is not Rickon, personally. And I think that in terms of where this will end up, my view is that we're and I'll take a step back. In terms of Lord of Winterfell, if we're going with the Stark, we just have to play who's going to survive. And that's the game we're in at the moment. Rickon died on the show. I think he's going to die in the books. We'll come on to that in just 1 second. Rob is also obviously gone already. Arya, in my view, is never going to be Lady of Winterfell, because that's not who she is. She's rejected this idea many times of being a noble lady. Bran is clearly going to end up being a tree wizard hooked up to the Weirwood network. Jon is onto, depending on your perspective, either bigger and better things as heir to the Iron Throne, or going to be dead. And I think personally that leaves only one Stark standing, is that everybody's favorite Stark, Sansa. So if you want a direct answer to who is going to be Lord of Winterfell, the answer is no one. There will be a Lady of Winterfell, and about time too. How do you agree, Gemma, or do you violently disagree with that one?
Yeah, I think ultimately, I think there might be a few twists and turns on the way towards that. And I think initially that this is part, when I mentioned that the Grand Northern Conspiracy is threefold, well, one of the other folds is the Howland Reed, Mage Mormont, Galbert Glover branch of the tree. They are basically looking for Howland Reed, and so and they are pushing Robb Stark's will, which named Jon as a Stark, because at this point Robb thought that Bran was dead. He thought that Rickon was dead, so he named Jon as his heir. So that might initially be a thing, but like you said, Jon's got kind of a different path. So ultimately, yeah, hashtag Sansa forever.
Yeah, I think that the only person we're missing right now is Telemaster Dan, who, if he's here when Sansa is mentioned, always goes off on one. And I think, however, it's a bit too late for him, so unfortunately he can't be here today. So we're free to say that Sansa is clearly the person who's going to be lined up to be Lady of Winterfell and potentially Queen of the North. Nine Nichols, thank you very much for your super chat, saying the Weirwoods see what's going on at Skagos. Could we get a Bran POV glimpsed through the tree? I think, yes, we could. I think that's entirely possible. I think the question is for the books whether or not that is the best way that George R. R. Martin wants to show what happens there. Personally, I suspect that the way that he will show what happens there will be through a Davos POV chapter. I think we've been following Davos's journey, and I think it would make sense to carry on following that rather than just going in with a Bran, who I wonder what's going on over here, kind of POV chapter. But Gemma, is there anything you wanted to add on that one?
Yeah, I think it will be Davos. I think it'll be a Davos POV. I think, like I said earlier on, I do believe that we've seen a brief glimpse of Skagos through a vision or a dream, a wolf dream already. So I can't really see any reason why we would need to see that again. I think that was a hint towards us being in Skagos with Davos. And I love Davos chapters. So I just write the damn book, George.
Yeah, I think he's written most of it.
I think he
I
has.
don't want to get into a huge discussion of it this time. I think he has written most of the Winds of Winter, and I humbly predict that it will be released in November of next year. That's what I think. He's holding it off until after we've had season 8, and then the publishers will say, "Hey, why don't we have it out in time for Christmas?" I think that's probably where we're going to end up. All of the hints of what he said suggest that he's most of the way through it. He's writing quite a lot of A Dream of Spring at the same time, just to make sure that all the threads work through. But I think that he's nearly there. So fingers crossed, maybe just like 18 months or more to go. Okay, we're going to start rounding this one up now, and we're going to get to the question that we've been sort of asking without answering all the way through this. And guys, if you've got any other particular questions you want to raise in the chat, just drop them in there and we'll try and pick them off just as we end up. But Gemma, the question is, if we're saying that in the books, Rickon is he's over in Skagos, this plan to get for Davos to go and collect him and bring him back, and for him to lead the Horny Goat army to reclaim Winterfell, that's not going to happen. Is his fate going to be roughly what it was on the show? Is he just going to get captured and then killed by Ramsay? Is this what's going to happen to him?
Yeah, I think it is, unfortunately, because I mean, Rickon is at like maximum 6 years old. Even in the books, he was a very tall 6-year-old in the show, but there was they were toying with the idea that George R. R. Martin might do a bit of a time jump in the Winds of Winter, that we might see, sort of 2 or 3 years maybe in the future. But that's been quashed now because we know that the Winds of Winter is going to pick up immediately after Dance. So Rickon is a child, which would make him a political football, not a political player, even if he does come back to Westeros with Davos, which we're not 100% sure he will. But even if he does, he's exceptionally vulnerable. And exactly what we discussed in the show, and Sansa nailed it. She said he is more important than John a bastard, or me a girl, or Bran a tree. Let's face it. I mean, I'm not quoting Sansa there, obviously, but as far as you just ran through all of the Starks in your bid to come up with who would rule Winterfell at the end of all of this, and girls do not get primogeniture in this world. It's always the males. An uncle will take precedence over a daughter, for example, a nephew, or so in order for Sansa to be Queen of the North or Lady of Winterfell, yeah, I'm not sure how it's going to happen, but I do think House Umber is going to have a hand in this. It not the same way as the show, but they do need Shaggy Dog. They've made that very clear, haven't they? Wyman Manderley has made it abundantly clear that Davos is not to return with just Rickon. He needs to bring Shaggy Dog because Shaggy Dog is the proof that Rickon is who he is. And obviously in the show, that's how the Umbers proved to Ramsay that Rickon was who they said he was. So yeah, I think D&D, they definitely have the cliff notes of this, and it might be a case of different castles leading different paths leading to the same castle, but ultimately I think a lot of these storylines are going to end up in very similar places.
Yeah, I'd agree very much with that. I think it's a shame, and I think where we'll end up in just a moment is just by recapping what we were talking about in the first half of this, which was quite what an untapped power Rickon probably is. But I think that he will end up, through one way or another, dying at the end of this very long story that actually amounted to not much. But I think that what the show didn't do, that I think the books will do, is show that this was a tragedy. This wasn't just like a sideshow. Oh, by the way, Rickon's dead now. This was a child who got abandoned by everybody as he was growing up. This was a child who was forced effectively to bring himself up with a wolf, and then got used by others and fundamentally died as a result of the end of it, despite the fact that he had huge potential. So I think that is the story that the books are going to be telling. And I think that is why, part of the reason why I wanted to do this live stream was to get people to reevaluate who Rickon is and quite actually how important he is, because the reason why we're talking about what's going on in the books is that the people there saw him as potentially the figurehead of the Starks, because they didn't know where Bran people. A lot of these questions about, who's going to inherit Winterfell was like, who should inherit Winterfell. Bran has disappeared north of the Wall, and everybody thinks that he's gone. So Rickon is the male heir, and so that is why they're trying to find him, because he's an important character. So that's where Gemma, perhaps if you want to have a quick flick through the chat just while I'm waffling for the next minute, just to see if there's anything you particularly want to pick up on. There was one thing I wanted just to say. I saw Lady Firesnow out there in the chat, who is going to be coming on hopefully very soon onto this channel for one of these live streams. Lady Fastner, if you do not know, has got a fantastic Game of Thrones channel, does some great videos. Please do go and check her out. And I'm going to be having her on one of these live streams very soon, hopefully next week, if we can get the technology worked out. But I just want to, while we're talking on Rickon, just to reiterate the point that this is a child, and I think that we miss the point in the show when we're looking at all of these actors who've aged by 8, 9 years since we first saw them. But Rickon is I haven't done the maths exactly, but 6 years old, something along those lines. Yeah. This is not a full-grown adult. This is a child who we should feel sorry for if they get shot by a mad psychopath with a bow. This is not just a side thing going on. This is a tragedy of the First Order, that this person should, through no fault of their own, be deemed worthy of killing just because of the system that they've been brought up in. But that's the end of my ranty waffle. Gemma, was there anything you spotted in the chat that you just want to pick up on?
Just you guys have just been wonderful. You've just been hilarious all the way through. It's difficult to kind of listen to you, keep my thread in my head, and read the chat all at the same time. But I love these live streams because they're just so spontaneous. I would like to finish on it's quite a sad note that we're finishing on, really, isn't it? The tragedy of Rickon Stark. I mean, you know, even though they're sending Davos and they want to get him back, it's not because they care for Rickon, not because they care that there's a child out there alone and lonely. They want his name. That's what they're interested in. But for politics, and I think as a plot device within the context of the books, he's primarily now there to connect Davos to the Starks, which again it's just tragic on every level, isn't it? Rickon's story, and like you said, that potential that we do believe was there, that will come to naught. The shaggy dog story of Rickon Stark.
Yeah, I agree completely, and I think that tragically, although I kind of teased that maybe it wasn't the case, this is a shaggy dog story. This is a long and sad story about a child who was abused by the system that had been built up before they were born, that got abused quite literally in a way. Because of their surname, because of who they were, because of what they were born into. They were abandoned. They had to fend for themselves. And then fundamentally, I think we're going to see Rickon die because of who he is, without ever seeing his potential. So I think this is a really sad story, but we just ignore it because it's not one of the interesting ones, as it were. This is just one of many sad stories in A Song of Ice and Fire. Okay, guys, I'm going to start wrapping up there. Let's just, as I ended on a sort of a low note, I'm going to try and lift us up as we're ending. Gemma, I'm sure most people know you and your channel, but for those who don't, where can people find you on the internet?
On the internet, I am available on the interwebs. This amazing technical, where am I? I'm Secrets of the Citadel on YouTube. I am at Citadel Secrets on Twitter. I am Secrets of the Citadel on Instagram, and I am Gemma with a G, Gemma Stark on Facebook. So come and find me.
Fantastic. And I just want to thank you again, Gemma, for coming on. As I say, I mentioned at the beginning, this is an absolute honor and a delight, and I've been wanting to get you on the channel for a long time, and my patrons have been wanting you to come on the channel for a long time. So I'm delighted to have this chance, and I will be on Gemma's channel tomorrow with LML, who I don't know whether he's still there in the chat. We're going to be talking Norse mythology and A Song of Ice and Fire, and particularly thinking about trees, which I'm very much looking forward to. There's a lot going on there, so that's something to look forward to. I'm going to wrap it up, guys. Gemma said it a couple of times, but I want to say it as well. The chat has been amazing today. Thank you so much, guys. It's been a brilliant set of comments, questions, and some great unicorn, goat, rhinoceros emojis going on. Loved all of that. That was fantastic. If you're at all interested in supporting this channel, please do check out my Patreon. That's patreon.com/InDeepGeek. Link down there. And also, please do have a look at my new channel launching at the end of this month, which is called The Well Told Tale. Again, link down in the description. Guys, thank you so much. I've really appreciated this. Thank you again to Gemma, and thank you particularly for the super chats, and for also everyone there in the chat room. This has been absolutely fantastic. Thank you so much, guys, and I will see you again soon.
Bye.